Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Paddle Pod, your weekly podcast covering professional paddle, presented by Hugo and Gons. We're on to episode 93. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Hugo here today. Hugo, it's great to have you on. How you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Gons. I mean, from a sporting performance perspective, I've been better. For our listeners to know, I mean, we always share a bit of our personal side, particularly our endeavours on the paddle court. So Gons and I started a tournament yesterday evening, and unfortunately, we lost in the first round. 6-3, 7-5. It was a pretty even match. Yeah, a lot of opportunities for both sides, and these tournaments they involve golden balls or golden points when you get to juice, which is always a challenge. And I think that's really what we struggled with. I think we won 1 out of 4 or 5, and that just really decided the match. So yeah, as I say, not too happy about that, given that it was a first round match and we hadn't played a kind of federated tournament for a couple of months due to commitments, etc. But hey, new chance next week, if I'm not mistaken. And over the next few months, there's a lot of tournaments. So looking forward to that.
Exactly. I mean, I think what was gutting was that we lost both sets kind of at the end to the last game when we were serving. And I hate that that's such a bad feeling when you lose the set like that because it almost feels like I don't know, it's just like an unnatural way to lose a set, if you see what I mean. It's just all of a sudden snap out and, normally you'd lose a set by being broken at some point and then the actual team that broke you or the pair that broke you actually having to finish it off. So losing that final game and that meaning to lose the set or the match is devastating. So bit gutting, but fair play to our opposition. They did better than us. They played well. So yeah, but we move on from here, and I'm sure that we'll have a lot more success in the future.
Definitely. As they say, we live and learn.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe moving on, we came on here today, of course, to talk about the Brussels P2, which just finished yesterday. I mean, a bit of a shame now because it seems like we're going to have to wait quite a while for the next Premier Padel tournament. So I think it's scheduled on the 18th of May. So basically almost a month until the South American tour kind of starts, which feels kind of weird because it does feel like they've already been to South America. But we're not here to ramble on about the calendar because we've done that plenty of times in the past. And we did want to talk about Brussels, which once again hosted the Classico, I guess, of paddle these days. Coello and Tapia against Chingalan. And let me start by saying that it was an epic final. I think it was one of the better matches that we've seen, or at least finals that we've seen this season so far. And one of the better Chingalan performances, which I guess it's both a positive and a negative depending on how you look at it. But maybe Hugo, if you want to kick things off, I'll leave it up to you to take us away.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, it's probably worth mentioning before we start. I think the level of both the players and the tournament itself, in terms of infrastructure, courts, etc., was pretty perfect. I mean, pretty near 10 out of 10. I
The
think
courts were pretty cool, I must
yeah.
say.
I mean, the courts look great. There are a few players that have shared their concerns about the kind of black surface. I think it makes it a bit more slippery. I think it was Bedo Birceda posting a photo showing that her socks were completely black. So it clearly the ink gets moved around and even stained the players'
Interesting.
clothing, which is interesting. And we saw a few players slipping and struggling with kind of the grip on the black surface. I know that happened when we actually watched the Madrid tournament last year. That happened as well. So it may be an issue with the color, but I just think the court speed was, I'd say, pretty much perfect. I mean, it meant that when you went for a smash, it had to be pretty near 10 out of 10 for you to win the point and for the smash to be productive and efficient, which meant that the real specialists were the ones that could take advantage of it. And it meant that points were just longer because it wasn't that easy to finalize the points. I mean, I know we've said this before, but I really don't enjoy conditions that are incredibly fast, like when we were watching the tournament out in Chile. I know it's good to have variety, but I wouldn't want tournaments like that week in, week out, where you're just kind of not being able to play a lob because you're going to, regardless of whether the smash is good or not, the ball and the conditions make it very easy to close points and win points. So I think the court speed was perfect. I think that's probably one of the reasons why Chingalan were better and managed to compete against Tapia and Coello, and B, a pair like Bergamini Navarro managed to make the semi-finals, obviously benefiting from those slower court conditions. But Yeah, maybe moving on to the final, and I'll just share my initial thoughts. Cons, you and I spoke about this yesterday. I thought that Chingalan kicked off the match really well, and right from the start, it felt like their kind of anxiety or frustration or kind of what we'd read, particularly from Galán's side throughout previous tournaments, of them trying to close points too quickly or kind of, dual frustration had disappeared, which was great. And I think that was one of the main reasons why they managed to win that first set in the final 6-2. And it was very dominant performance. I mean, part of it was also due to the fact that Tapia was a bit disconnected. And I felt that his first set and a half, well, for his level, I think it was pretty poor. Then he managed to turn it around. And for me, he was the MVP. But focusing on Chingalan, I thought that they'd really managed to turn around their frustration and their kind of bad habits from a mindset perspective. And then suddenly, as soon as Coello and Tapia managed to turn the game around in that decisive 7th game in the second set where they broke Chingalan, and kind of, I think that really changed the whole momentum of the match. I think that after that, Chingalan, this is, really struggled from a mental standpoint. I just felt that they turned right back to, what has happened throughout recent finals and throughout the last, 11 or 12 straight finals that they've lost against Coello and Tapia. They just end up getting incredibly frustrated and they show it and they make mistakes out of frustration. And personally, I'm worried about them as a pair. And just because I don't think that they can actually viably challenge Coello and Tapia for the number 1 spot anymore. I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels that way, especially because it's kind of the best match I think that we've seen them play in ages, or at least it gave me that feeling, both from a score perspective, obviously being, winning that first set kind of comfortably, to be honest, and then also in the second set, I felt like up until the point where they initially got broken, they were especially on their serve, they were quite comfortable and they weren't giving Coello and Tapia many chances. So it felt like really good kind of, it felt like they were just really in control throughout the game and similar. And we spoke about this as well. Like in so many matches, you feel like Coello and Tapia, for example, they're not pulling away, but you just know that even if they get broken, that they're just gonna eventually win. And to be honest, I had that sort of same feeling with Chingalan in this match, even though in the second set it seemed like, oh, okay, Coello and Tapia are back now, and it's like they're actually playing well and they're maybe giving Chingalan trouble here and there. But I don't know, I had that feeling that Chingalan seems so in control. So, and maybe that's due to the fact that you mentioned they were a lot more calmer and they hadn't shown at least that frustration up until that point that they'd shown in the past. So it's strange because in a way it's kind of the best performance that they've had in a while. And to be honest, maybe all season, just taking into account the level of competition, even though they haven't won. But then at the same time, it's like you've played your best in ages and that still wasn't enough. And that's my fear. I think that especially on Galán's side, which to me, Galán was the MVP up until kind of Tapia came alive. And I thought that Galán individually seemed to have the performance that he had towards last year, where he was like on superhero, Superman mode, where he would have to basically win everything. And he was, honestly, I thought was sensational, especially in that cross-court battle against Tapia. But then at the end, that obviously dissolved and Tapia grew into the match. And then I think that frustration kicked in, as you mentioned. And then definitely I thought Tapia ended up taking over the game and the MVP of the match. From Galán's side, I think it must be frustrating that he was able to offer this level and maybe Chingotto just wasn't alongside him. I did think though that Chingotto, a couple of key points he did play well, but just the general level still feel like he's committing probably a bit more unforced errors than he has been in the past, and he's not kind of compensating that with generating a lot of winners. So that's where probably the formula doesn't work as well. And yeah, I just have a feeling that potentially Galán is thinking this is it, right? Like we've played as well as we could have, or we've played the best we've played in ages. I've individually played, I think, a great match, and it still isn't enough, right? And it's also interesting because it feel like they switched the tactic a bit to get Galán more involved in the game. And by this, I mean they played a lot more to Tapia than they had done in the past, especially Chingotto. We know that Chingotto loves to play cross court and he's very insisting on playing to Coello. but I thought that he was playing a lot more to Tapia because obviously then Tapia would play cross court a lot more, which meant getting Galán a lot more engaged. And I felt like that was a tactic that had kind of shifted between the last matches. So in a way, it was also quite nice to see them actually implement something differently to what they've done in the past, because in the past it just felt like nothing really changed. And so it definitely seemed to pay off, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Because if you're playing so much to Tapia, you just kind of have to pray that he never connects to the game. And initially it was working, but at the end of the day, maybe you just play so much to him that at the end of the day, he's gonna have one of those magic moments, magic points, and then after that, maybe he's just like super into the game, super concentrated and motivated, and then you're kind of done because he takes over. But it was nice to see. But I agree with you. I mean, to be honest, this just feels very much like a summer break coming up because they just don't have enough right now, I think, to beat them and therefore to challenge for the number one.
No, I mean, as you say, it is refreshing to see Chingalan changing their tactic because I think towards the end of last season, the tactic was clear. It was let's gamble on Chingotto winning the cross-court battle against Coello because Tapia, when they tried to do and play a lot of balls to Tapia, that had definitely not worked. And to be honest, I think that tactic with Coello did not work because, as we said towards the end of last season, Coello almost became the MVP of those El Clásicos, those encounters across or between Chingalan and Goyan Tapia. And it's good to see them say, hey, let's go back to the drawing board. That clearly didn't work. Let's keep Goyan out of the match. And by playing more balls to Tapia, that should mean that, as in paddle, we all know that it's way easier to play cross court and it's kind of like a natural shot. Then we're going to get Galán more involved. So, hey, instead of putting the pressure on the Coello Chingotto encounter, let's switch it and let's play it on the Galán Tapia, which maybe on paper seems to be more even. But I do think that has a fundamental issue, and it's the fact that Goya finds the way to get involved more than Tapia did back in the day when he was being frozen out. I don't know whether you remember, but there was a lot of times when Chingalan managed to freeze Tapia out, and that actually meant that they won a lot of matches and a lot of finals against Goya and Tapia. But I just think that Goya being so big and getting up he manages to get or to cover so much of the court, given that he's so big and so wide, that even when in this final in Brussels, even when there was kind of a long point that was a cross-court battle between Tapia and Galán, Goya managed to find a way to get involved in that point and a lot of times win it. It was true that sometimes he maybe try to get involved too early or try to go for a smash when maybe it isn't in the right moment and Chingalan won the point. But I think generally Goyo picked his moments really well. So, in summary, and to be honest, Gonz, I don't know whether you agree, but maybe given that there's going to be about a month of no tournaments, maybe we can leave kind of the question of who should Galán look at if he does think about changing pairs. Maybe we can leave that question for next week's episode or, for the following month. But I did want to say that I just had a quick look at the rankings, and maybe this is a snippet, maybe a little insight into what we could talk about next week. And I've seen that, if I'm not mistaken, if Galán teams up with Yanguas, for example, they would still be the number 2 seeded pair, which is baffling. I mean, Yanguas has half as many points as Chingotto has, and they would still be the 2nd seeded pair. I mean, they wouldn't have a huge points gap on Stupa and Lebron. I mean, they would be right behind them, but they would still be the 2nd seeded pair. And then if Galán looked at Cardona, which, as we know, Cardona really doesn't have that many points. I mean, I think Galán's on about almost 15,000 or maybe more after this tournament. Cardona's on about 4,000. I think they would sit just behind Stupa and Lebron, but I'm talking less than 1,000 points difference. So it clearly shows that even if Galán looked elsewhere, that really wouldn't affect their seeding. It would affect their short-term or his short-term kind of ambitions to clinch the number 1 spot because the points gap between Chingalan and Goyan Tapia is much less than what it would be if Galán teams up with Cardona or Yanguas, which seem to be their main options if we ignore Lebron, who, for obvious reasons, might not be an option right now for Galán, given their personal issues. But yeah, I just wanted to share that because I was actually quite surprised. And I think that that's going to be a big attraction for Galán. I don't know whether you agree.
No, I think it's really interesting. And to be fair, we've seen Galán in the past when he paired up with Chingotto, not necessarily minding so much in terms of having to be that number 2 seed, right? I think he took a bit of a gamble because they didn't start as the number two. And if I remember correctly, for example, they had at least one tournament in Sevilla where they had to face Coello and Tapia in the semis, and they ended up beating them and going into the final and winning that tournament. So we've seen essentially a precedent of Galán taking a gamble with a player, maybe, with Chingotto, that he thought like, okay, I'm just going to invest in this project and not necessarily, and taking a step back, let's say, from a seeding perspective, or not being the top seed like opportunity, and essentially having to claw their way in a bit and reaching that number two, that essentially means that they wouldn't have to face Coello and Tapia until the final. So we have seen that in the past. He's done it and it worked out. So I think, to be honest, if he sees Cardona as like a much better option than Yang was, for example, or even another player that's kind of in that Cardona type level, and he really thinks like, yeah, this is the player that I need to challenge for the number one spot, then I can definitely see him taking it. Obviously, Yang was feels like a safer bet, and I guess we definitely will talk about it in the next couple of weeks or next couple of episodes, because I think it's definitely one of the most interesting topics right now. But it'll be interesting, and like you said, it definitely will mean that probably for this season, it's kind of like a waving the white flag to the number one. I mean, technically, he could still get it, right, because the ranking is an individual ranking, and if he pairs up with someone, with another person and another player, and they're super successful, like he could maybe individually reach that number one spot. Obviously, I find it unlikely, especially if you go someone that's a bit lesser ranked, where you're probably thinking that it's more of like an investment, at least this year, into getting that partnership correct and working well. And then maybe you have an actual chance next year. But it just feels like the current partnership is not, I mean, with Chingotto, it's kind of given everything that it has, right? And what we've seen as well so far this season is that the actual players that are giving Coello and Tapia the most challenge are Augsburger and Cardona, which are basically the same formula that Coello and Tapia implement. And Coello said it himself. I mean, I think in one of the post-match interviews against Augsburger and Cardona, he said something along the lines of, I'm having nightmares whenever we see these guys. And to be fair, their draws haven't been lucky for them, because they're basically seems like they're facing them every single tournament early on. So it's a massive challenge. So it just feels like that's the partnership, or those are the style of players that will give Coello and Tapia the most trouble. And Galán is certainly one of those type of players, at least from a characteristic traits perspective. He just needs alongside him someone similar in that sense.
It definitely feels like it. And actually, I don't know whether you heard this. I've actually just kind of read it online. Throughout the match in Brussels in the final, there's a moment when obviously the cameras are recording what players are saying, changeovers, etc. And one of the changeovers, Galán said, I feel a lot of pressure on myself to finish the points and win the points. And there were moments towards the end of the match where Galán, when Chingotto made a mistake, or even when they just lost the point, whether it was his mistake or Chingotto's mistake, or just a good point on behalf of Tapia and Coello, he just kind of shrugged his shoulders, almost as if he was to say, I mean, this is just kind of the natural swing of things, and this is just bound to happen. And it almost feels like his mindset, or this is what I see from the outside, he's just accepted that this is how it's going to be, and he doesn't really see a viable solution in terms of the Chingalan versus Coello and Tapia encounter changing, at least in the short term. I don't know how that could change, even in the medium term, with Chingotto by his side, because they've tried all sorts of things. They've tried to freeze out Tapia. They've now tried to freeze out Coello. They've tried on fast courts, medium courts, slow courts. And the last, I don't know what it is, 11 or 12 finals they've lost. So it is a really tricky situation, I think, particularly for Galán, just because of being honest and fully transparent, at least in my opinion, and I think you agree. Galán is at Coello and Tapia's level. And we think that, well, next to a different partner, he could potentially challenge them, whereas Chingotto potentially has reached his ceiling, at least in this kind of super fast, aggressive style that Padel has, well, become and evolved into. So I think for Galán, it's really a really tough decision, because in a way you could just say, I'm just going to accept that we are, by quite a significant gap, the second best pair in the world, and we've got a big kind of points difference with respect to Stupa and Lebron, who are sitting at third. And even though they're having a great season, I mean, the points gap between them and Chingalan is significant. So, hey, let's just accept that we're the second best pair in the world and try to keep fighting against Coello and Tapia, maybe win a final every now and then, but they are better. And unless something significant happens to them, one of them just dropping their level a lot, I'm talking about Coello and Tapia, or one of them getting injured, like what happened with Lebron and Galán, which really gave way to Coello and Tapia clinching that number one spot, at least in the first instance. Unless something like that happens, just accepting that we're going to sit as the second best pair, which would kind of be a fair rationale. Or is Galán going to be ambitious and say, hey, this is not changing, and the earlier I address it, the better, because I don't know whether I myself, say Galán, I'm going to drop my level. And if Galán drops his level, hey, it's lights off. There's no chance that Chingalan would really be able to challenge Coello and Tapia. So it's a really tough decision for him, and it's very risky to consider changing partners when you're making finals week in, week out. I mean, they've literally made 95% of the finals that they've been able to play as a pair. So thinking about a pair change is in a way ludicrous, but in my eyes, it's blatant. They've reached their ceiling. I think they haven't performed at the peak of their game as a pair. I'm saying Chingalan for a long time. So I think that's when kind of alarm bells go on, and when you start saying, hey, maybe we need a different solution.
Yeah, and I mean, if you take into account as well this tournament and the conditions, I'd say that they're probably better for Chingalan because you still have Galán who can smash in any type of condition, but you don't have the threat of both Coello and Tapia, being able to smash consistently and constantly in somewhere like, for example, Chile or another place where conditions are much faster. So if they're still able to beat you here, you've changed your tactic, you had the match, you basically had the match exactly where you wanted it. I mean, then after being broken, you break back. So it just feels like the options are exhausted in terms of all the things that they've tried, all the conditions that they've played, and the result just is always the same. And another thing as well to take into account, we know that Galán has the ambition to be number one. He said it repeatedly. You can see how competitive he is as a player on court and off court as well. And he is 28 years old. I mean, obviously that's not old, and he's still got years in his peak. But when you think about Coello and Tapia, Tapia is 25 years old. If I'm not mistaken, Coello is younger. So, I mean, these guys, they're going to still be there for a significant amount of time, and they're not technically in their prime yet. So when you think about that, and Galán is 28, and he potentially has like, let's say 3 years at his absolute top of his game, and then maybe from 30 onwards, from a physical point of view, maybe starts declining a bit more. So the rice is cooking, like time's passing by, and he doesn't necessarily have a huge window, or at least his window is definitely smaller than Coello and Tapias. So if he wants to grab that number one spot, I mean, he doesn't have a lot of bullets left to take a chance on.
No, exactly. And I mean, this is not to say that he can't reach the number one spot in 5 years when something happens. Who knows? I mean, if you think about it, if Coello ever decided to split from Tapia, obviously his number one option would be Galán. And
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a hell of a partnership. And to be honest, they'd probably be better positioned to be at the top of the rankings because Tapia would have to look elsewhere. And I think probably Coello and Galán on paper would be the best pair in the world. Then you've got to see how they fit. You've got to see what each player's individual situation is like from a level perspective, confidence, etc. But yeah, I mean, as I say, maybe we want to use this whole Galán's decision. Who should he look at? What options does he have? Maybe we want to use it for content for our next episode. So it's probably a good time to.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the episode. I mean, one of the wildest things just happened. I don't think we've ever experienced this in our lifetime, but Hugh and I were recording the episode as usual, and all of a sudden, kind of the Wi-Fi seemed to stop, right? And I thought it was maybe my issue, and I text Hugo and kind of looking around, but all of a sudden the light seems to be off in my house. And I'm like, okay, this is a classic. It's just going to come back in 2, 3 minutes. I have to wait and it doesn't come back. And I'm getting a bit scared. And then I go outside my building and it seems like the light of the whole building is out and I see people outside. And I mean, it just basically turns out that there's been a power shortage or outage in Southern Europe. I mean, I think namely Spain, and the outage lasted around like 9 or 10 hours. So basically the whole day. So we couldn't get back to recording, and that is probably why this episode will be uploaded a bit later than usual. So we do apologize about that. But I mean, just one of the wildest things we've ever lived, right, Hugo?
No, literally. And I had exactly the same experience as you did. I mean, I just ended up chatting about Tello for a while, thinking that you were going to, get back online and we were going to be able to continue recording. So yeah, I mean, I was just there and had exactly the same experience. And yeah, I mean, apparently Portugal had the same issue, and some areas of southern France, parts of the kind of border with Spain. But yeah, I mean, couldn't be a bigger shit show. We use this word a lot when talking about tournaments, Premier Padel matches, etc. But yeah, this is actually the biggest one I've I've experienced, probably after COVID, to be fair, which lasted
Yeah, I mean,
a bit longer.
honestly, yeah, after COVID, this is the wildest thing I've experienced. I mean, traffic lights were not working. Can you imagine how, and there were so many cars in the street, like you can imagine how wild it was. It is literally like the Wild West out there. Like it was absolutely mad. Like nothing was working, no electricity whatsoever I mean, the whole country. So just no way to contact your family members, friends, or anything like that. So, I mean, I hope that everyone's safe out there and like nothing major has happened. So yeah, I mean, absolutely wild one.
No, literally. I mean, the supermarkets were literally raided, not illegally, but honestly, my supermarket downstairs,
Yeah,
suddenly like all the water was gone and the water was working. People just lost their heads. I mean, all the bottles of
yeah,
water were taken and the water was fine. So
yeah,
yeah. But anyway, it's probably a good time to crack on
yeah,
with paddle related issues. And it'd be great to hear if any of our viewers have had the same experience, because I'm sure we'll have a few, not just in Spain, but maybe in Portugal, maybe southern areas of France. So please do share in
yeah. We
comments.
hope you're okay, by the way.
Exactly. That's the most important thing. But yeah, so moving on to pairs and matches beyond obviously El Clasico, the big finale between Chingalan and Goya Tapia, which obviously we analysed quite in depth. And again, it'd be great to hear our viewers' thoughts on what they think about the future of Chingalan, and also just why that match ended up swaying Goya Tapia's way. But yeah, as I said, even though I spoke about Nenno and Tello for quite a while by myself, looking at the screen yesterday when the internet went down, I'll introduce them again. And yeah, it was great to see them making the semi-finals in their first tournament together. As we know, Nenno decided to split from Javi Garrido and has teamed up with Juan Tello, who is a reborn player this season, really, and has reaped some great results with Dino Libac. Unfortunate for Dino Libac to actually face that split, given their results on court. But I mean, I guess it makes sense that if you get a call from Nenno, who is objectively a top 5 forehand player in the world, and thinking about the points as well, I understand Tello's decision. But yeah, it was a great tournament from them. They beat Alex Ruiz and Juan Lebron, obviously a circumstantial pair due to Stupa's injury. They beat them in 3 sets in the quarterfinals. And then in the semis, they faced Chingalan, who really struggled to beat Tello Nenno. I mean, they did beat them in 2 sets, double 7-5, but Tello Nenno even had a set point in the second set. And I just thought throughout they were really, really on top of the match. I mean, it could have really gone either way. They broke Chingalan. It was just a very even affair. And I think this partnership makes so much sense. We discussed it previously. Even though they haven't played together before officially, this is Premier Padel or on tour, they have shared the court during the Hexagon Cup. They're part of the same team, AD Advantage, and they won actually the first edition of the Hexagon Cup as a pair. They didn't this year in 2025, but they still did really well. And you could see that on court. Great chemistry. Apparently they get on really well. Obviously both Argentinian. And yeah, I just think that it makes so much sense. I mean, a traditional forehand player in the Nenno. And I think the Nenno got a little bit lost last season when playing with Lebron, who's obviously an uncharacteristic backhand player who was outside of his comfort zone. He's obviously, I think we can all agree, a better forehand player, more differential, and knows what he's kind of meant to do in certain situations. Even though Lebron is very chaotic, I think his chaos on the backhand was almost a bit too much. And it meant that the Nenno really didn't know how to support him or what the pair needed from him specifically. And now next to Tello, he looks back to his best, really. I mean, early days, but still great signs. And Tello, once again, I mean, continuing his streak of form. He really made Galán struggle in that cross-court battle. And I think two key aspects from him is one, his confidence seems to be back. And two, because of that, his smash, which is one of his best shots, is also, I wouldn't say back to his best, but maybe at 80% or so. I mean, the amount of times in that semi-final and throughout the tournament where he used a smash during crucial moments of the match and it paid off. I mean, previously he had one of the best smashes on tour. He's just got such an elegant technique. And yeah, really impressed by them. What did you think, Gons?
No, 100%. I have to say that Tello for me is arguably the most improved player so far this season. I know you had LeBron as a shout, and I think it's a very good shout because he's definitely improved on last season. But I'd have to give Tello the edge right now, given where he has come from. I mean, last season was absolutely horrendous for Tello, and now he seems to be like one of the most determined players, and definitely on the left hand side, and I would say on the whole tour so far. I mean, he's had an absolutely amazing start to his season, and in this tournament as well. I thought that, to be honest, I thought that he carried the pair. I mean, in that semi final, I was more worried about Nenno's level, or more concerned about Nenno's level than actually Tello's. I thought that so many times, and kind of the way they lost that game was mostly because Nenno actually felt to me like he was playing so many short lobs, and Galán was able to capitalize on them. And to be fair, Galán, I thought in this semi as well, was absolutely amazing. I mean, he has some points like, that he loves to do, the molinete, or like the how he blocks those volleys, which is just like absolutely insane. He had a couple of winners like that. And overall, I thought he was very, very determined and kind of carried the pair, similar to how he played in the final. But I think a lot of that came from the fact that Nenno played kind of very easy balls for Galán to finish, and obviously you can't do that with against the caliber of a player that is Alejandro Galán. So it's surprising, right? Because the Nenno is normally the most stable, more consistent player, and I still feel like he hasn't reached the level that we had seen him before. Now, hopefully, he does find it with Tello, and Tello can give him that confidence to play freely, because he knows that Tello can finish the point at any time. So again, really like the partnership. I think they will do quite well, and if Martín is able to become just a little bit more consistent, I think that there'll be tough challenges, and they could be a pair that consistently gets to the semifinals, because I mean they have all the ingredients, right? They can attack, they can defend, they can play slow, they can play fast. So they're still players in their peak physically wise. So I think they're a very, very good pair moving forward. And maybe just touching on the last point on the Nenno as well, I think you can kind of see what I mean in terms of like level drop off by when you compare him with his cross court battles against Chingotto. Now that was before a very one-sided affair, and Nenno, sorry, was clearly always better than Chingotto. But in that cross-court battle, you could see that now the matchup is very even, and Chingotto many times coming on the upper hand. So if he's just able to get back to that level, then I think this pair has like a lot of runway, to be honest.
Agreed. And actually, I mean, obviously, I was quite positive when talking about the Nenno. I do think that he showed a lot of signs of improvement in this tournament next to Tello, throughout, and even in that semi-final against Chingalan. But I do agree, he's still obviously not back to his best. I think he's still, I mean, he's changed pair a lot recently. Obviously, played with LeBron end of last season, having split with Stupa, then now with Garrido for a few tournaments, now with Tello. They're obviously all very different players. And I think he's always been the one trying to adapt, because he's trying to keep the backhand players comfortable in their kind of ecosystem. Because, well, as we normally say, backhand players potentially could be the more important player in a pair in terms of finalizing points. And if you want your backhand player to feel like he can really dominate the match and produce that amount of winners, which you normally expect from the backhand player, forehand players normally try to adapt. And I think that's what the Nenno's tried to do, but potentially a step too far. So as I say, I do think he showed signs of improvement already. I think he looks really comfortable with Tello, but I do agree that cross-court battle with Chingotto that you're mentioning was something that we used to watch before, and we used to say the Nenno is just a little bit better. And
Yeah.
now, when you look shot by shot, I think they've got similar bandejas, similar víboras, even similar defensive qualities. But I just think that one thing that Chingotto has and the Nenno doesn't is when he's up close to the net, blocking those kind
Hmm.
of choques de voleas, right? Those volley encounters. That's something that Chingotto is a specialist at, one of the best in the world, without a doubt. And that's something that the Nenno doesn't have in his game. So right now, I almost see that specific area of the game as the differential. I think before, the Nenno supplemented it with a better smash than Chingotto, because actually he was smashing quite a lot, even with Stupa, and it was being quite productive. And defensively, he was just a wall, sometimes even better than Chingotto. But now it's really evened out. And to be honest, I do agree. I think Chingotto's got the upper hand right now.
Yeah, but I mean, regardless, still very promising signs. I mean, their first tournament together, and I mean, if they continue on this path, I think that they're gonna be a real handful to deal with, especially for the top pairs. And hopefully they do continue like this, because I think they're like, I really like both of them, Tello and Nenno, as players, as kind of like as partners as well together, and as people. Like I think they're their success, I think, does well for the tour in general. I think they're really likable. So hopefully we continue to see them on the up. But yeah, I mean, I think this brings us probably to the end of the of a wild episode. Let's just put it like that. But I do hope everyone has enjoyed. And yeah, like again, very much apologize for the late upload, but nothing we could do on our side here to kind of expedite that, given the reasons that we mentioned earlier. But I do still hope that everyone has enjoyed, and please leave a comment if you have. Yeah, sorry, Hugo, go ahead.
No, all I was going to say is please, tune in for next week's episode. Even though there's obviously a big break in the Premier Padel calendar, we'll look to address you guys. And one thing that we're definitely going to comment is, will Galán look elsewhere? If so, who should he look at? Maybe we can talk about specific players and options and what we think or how we think that specific pair would do. I think another interesting topic as well could be, and be great to touch on it next week, where do we see Tello and Nenno fighting? Are they actually going to fight against the big three or the big two? Are they on paper looking even better than Yanguas Nieto, who are obviously having a great season, even though this week in Brussels it was the first time that they didn't make the semi-finals. They lost to obviously an inform, I'd say, Paquito and Bergamini. So yeah, a lot of topics. Please tune in. But otherwise, have a great week and catch you soon.